I never expected that a simple late-night project at work, the kind of soul-crushing deadline that usually just leads to burnout and a deep appreciation for caffeine, would completely change my life. But that's exactly what happened. It wasn't the project itself, of course. It was the person I was forced to share a cramped, dusty room with for 2 straight weeks. It was him. It was Caleb. My name is Miles. I'm a graphic designer, which is a profession that tends to attract people who are comfortable with solitude and the steady, quiet hum of a computer. I fit the description perfectly. My life was a series of well-ordered routines. The same coffee shop in the morning, the same route to the office, the same desk tucked away in a corner where I could feel part of the ambient energy of the workplace without having to be at the center of it. I was an observer, content to live in the margins, creating visual order out of chaos for our clients. My world was calm, predictable, and, if I were being honest with myself, a little bit lonely. The company I worked for, Henderson Architectural Firm, was a mid-sized operation filled with the usual office archetypes. There were the frantic junior architects, the seasoned, cynical senior partners, and our slightly out-of-touch but well-meaning boss, Mr. Henderson. And then there was Caleb. Caleb didn't fit neatly into any category. He was a project manager, a role that put him at the intersection of every department. He was the firm's kinetic energy, a force of nature who moved through the open-plan office with a confidence that I could only dream of. He was loud, but not in an obnoxious way. His laugh was a deep, genuine rumble that could cut through the low murmur of the office, and it always made people smile. He was constantly on the phone, solving logistical nightmares, or leaning over someone's desk, pointing at a blueprint and explaining something with an easy authority. He was tall, with broad shoulders that his work shirts always seemed to strain against, and he had a habit of running a hand through his dark, messy hair when he was concentrating. To me, he was like a character from a different story who had wandered into mine by mistake. He was vibrant, engaged, and so thoroughly, effortlessly masculine that my quiet, internal world felt miles away from his. I admired him from the safety of my corner desk, the way you admire a beautiful, powerful storm from behind a thick pane of glass. He was, in my mind, completely and utterly unattainable. I assumed, as I think everyone did, that he was straight. He talked about sports with the other guys, mentioned going to games on the weekend, and had the kind of easy, friendly rapport with the women in the office that never seemed to cross a line. There was never a girlfriend mentioned, but that didn't stop my brain from creating one for him. A cheerful, equally outgoing woman who probably loved hiking and owned a golden retriever. It was a self-preservation tactic, you know, building a wall of assumptions to protect my own heart from doing anything stupid, like hoping. So, for the first year I worked at Henderson, that was our dynamic. I was the quiet guy in the corner, and he was the sun the office seemed to orbit around. We exchanged pleasantries, of course. "Morning, Miles," he'd say, flashing a quick grin as he passed my desk. "Hey, Caleb," I'd reply, my voice probably a little too quiet. Our interactions were footnotes in my day, small reminders of the comfortable distance between our worlds. I was fine with that. Or at least, I told myself I was. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You get used to a certain kind of quiet, and you start to mistake it for peace. Then came the Henderson Tower proposal. It was the biggest project our firm had ever vied for, a massive skyscraper that could redefine the city's skyline and, not incidentally, secure our company's future for the next decade. The pressure was immense. Everyone was on edge, working late, fueled by stale coffee and nervous energy. Mr. Henderson, a man who normally delegated with a detached air, was personally invested in this one. His name was literally on the line. One Monday morning, he called me and Caleb into his glass-walled office. The room always felt like a fishbowl, and I hated being in it. Caleb, of course, strode in and sat down as if he owned the place, giving me a small, encouraging nod. I just tried to blend in with the expensive leather chair. "Gentlemen," Mr. Henderson began, steepling his fingers. "The Henderson Tower pitch is everything. The final presentation is in 2 weeks, and it needs to be flawless." Utterly flawless, he looked at Caleb. "Caleb, you'll be handling all the logistics, the technical specifications, the budget breakdowns, and the presentation structure. You know how to sell it." Caleb nodded, his expression serious. "I'm on it, sir." Then, Mr. Henderson's gaze shifted to me, and my stomach did a slow, nervous flip. Miles, your work is exceptional. Clean, modern, sophisticated. I need you to create all the visuals. The renderings, the animated fly-throughs, the mock-ups for the presentation deck. I want people to see your visuals and feel like the tower is already built. Of course, Mr. Henderson, I managed to say. Good. Excellent. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. And then he dropped the bomb. This is too important for the usual distractions of the main office. I've cleared out the old archive room on the 3rd floor for you two. It's quiet, private. You'll have everything you need. I want you both living and breathing this project. Work together, side by side, until it's done. No excuses. My mind went completely blank. The archive room. It was a small, windowless space at the end of a forgotten hallway, filled with old blueprints and forgotten models. It was basically a large closet. For 2 weeks, I would be in a closet with Caleb. The thought sent a jolt through me that was equal parts sheer terror and a tiny, treacherous spark of something else. Something that felt dangerously like excitement. I glanced at Caleb. He was already looking at me, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. Maybe he was as thrilled about this as I was. Right. The archive room was exactly as I remembered it, only smaller. It smelled of old paper, dust, and the faint, chemical scent of cleaning supplies. Mr. Henderson had been true to his word. 2 desks and powerful workstations had been set up along one wall, so close together that our chairs would inevitably bump if we both moved at the same time. A long table against the opposite wall was already covered in blueprints and binders. The only light came from the humming fluorescent tubes overhead, casting a sterile, unchanging glow on everything. It felt less like a workspace and more like a bunker. The first day was excruciatingly awkward. We moved our things in, the silence broken only by the clicking of our keyboards and the software of the computer fans. The air was thick with unspoken professionalism. We were 2 colleagues forced into an intimate space, and we were both trying very hard to pretend it was normal. We talked only about work. Can you send me the specs for the lobby atrium? Caleb would ask, his voice sounding too loud in the small room. They're in your inbox, I'd reply, my eyes glued to my screen. I was intensely aware of him. I could hear the soft scratch of his pen as he made notes, the rhythmic tap of his fingers on the desk when he was thinking, the sound of his breathing. It was a level of proximity I was completely unused to, and it sent my finely tuned observational skills into overdrive. I learned the way he shifted his weight in his chair when he was getting frustrated, the low sigh he let out when a vendor gave him bad news, the way he'd absent-mindedly twist a paperclip into a perfect little sculpture. These were details I had no business knowing, and each one felt like a secret I was stealing. The breakthrough, the first crack in the formal facade, came on the 3rd night. We had been working for 12 hours straight. My eyes were burning, and my brain felt like mush. Around 9 o'clock, my stomach let out a low, mournful growl that was impossible to ignore in the profound silence. I froze, mortified, but then I heard a low chuckle from beside me. I risked a glance at Caleb. He was leaning back in his chair, a tired but amused smile on his face. I think your stomach is trying to tell us something, Miles. Yeah, I think it's staging a protest, I admitted, a small smile touching my own lips. It was the first non-work thing I'd said to him in days. What are you in the mood for? He asked, already pulling up a food delivery app on his phone. My treat. Hazard pay for being locked in this box. Oh, you don't have to do that. I insist. Now pizza? Thai. What's the verdict? We ended up in a surprisingly intense 10-minute debate over pizza toppings, a conversation so mundane and normal it felt revolutionary. I found myself arguing passionately against pineapple, and Caleb defended it with a mock seriousness that made me laugh. A real laugh. The sound surprised me. When the pizza arrived, we cleared a space on the large table and ate straight from the box, our knees almost touching. The sterile bunker suddenly felt a little more like a messy dorm room. That pizza was the turning point. After that, the dam of formality broke. We started talking, really talking. In between rendering files and proofreading budget sheets, we filled the quiet hours with stories. He asked me about my life before Henderson, and I told him about art college, about my passion for minimalist design, about how I preferred expressing myself through images rather than words. He listened intently, asking questions that showed he was genuinely curious, not just making polite conversation. In return, He shared parts of himself that I never would have guessed at. He told me he hadn't gone to college. He'd started working construction with his father right out of high school, learning the practical, physical side of building things. He'd worked his way up, moving from the field to the office, learning the management side through sheer grit and a sharp mind. He confessed that sometimes, surrounded by architects with fancy degrees, he felt like an imposter. "They all talk about theory and aesthetics," he said one night, staring at a complex architectural drawing. "I just know what works, what holds up in a storm. Sometimes I feel like I'm speaking a different language." This revelation floored me. Caleb, the guy I saw as the pinnacle of confidence, had insecurities. He had vulnerabilities. It made him seem suddenly, achingly human. The larger-than-life figure from the main office was being replaced by this thoughtful, surprisingly humble man sitting 3 feet away from me. My admiration, once distant and safe, began to morph into something deeper, something warmer, and far more dangerous. A few nights later, another small moment happened, but it felt huge to me. The air conditioning in the old building was notoriously fickle, and the archive room was freezing. I was so focused on my work that I hadn't realized I was shivering until Caleb's jacket was being draped gently over the back of my chair. I looked up, startled. He was already turning back to his desk, pretending he hadn't done it. "The vent's right over you," he mumbled, his focus suddenly intense on his screen. I pulled the jacket around my shoulders. It was heavy and warm, and it smelled faintly of him, a clean, woodsy scent mixed with something uniquely Caleb. I sat there, wrapped in his warmth, my heart doing a frantic, silent tap dance in my chest. It was such a simple, considerate gesture, but it felt profoundly intimate. I worked for the rest of the night with a quiet, buzzing energy, analyzing the weight of the fabric on my shoulders, the kindness of the act, and what, if anything, it might mean. Hope, I was beginning to learn, was a stubborn and terrible thing. By the end of the second week, a strange domesticity had settled over our little bunker. We knew each other's coffee orders by heart. We had inside jokes about Mr. Henderson's terrible ties. We could work in comfortable silence for hours, but it was a shared silence now, not an empty one. The project was nearing completion, and while we were both exhausted, there was a sense of camaraderie, of having been through something together. I had gotten so used to his presence, to the low hum of his energy next to mine, that I started to dread the project's end. Going back to my quiet corner in the main office felt like a step backward, a return to a world that was suddenly less colorful. The turning point came on what was supposed to be our final late night. We had just put the finishing touches on the animated fly-through, the centerpiece of my visual contribution. It was nearly 2 in the morning. We'd exported the final file, and for the first time in days, there was nothing left to do but wait for the presentation the next morning. A profound quiet settled over the room, different from before. It wasn't the quiet of work or awkwardness. It was the quiet of completion. I was leaning back in my chair, staring at the finished product on my screen, feeling a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Caleb let out a long, slow sigh from beside me. "We did it, Miles," he said, his voice low and raspy with fatigue. "It actually looks incredible." "We did," I agreed, a genuine smile spreading across my face. I finally turned to look at him. He was watching me, not the screen. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked tired, his hair was a mess, but his eyes were bright and focused, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that made the air feel thin. He leaned back in his chair, mirroring my posture, and slowly, deliberately, began to pull his tie the rest of the way off. But he didn't toss it aside. He just held the strip of dark blue silk in his hands, running it through his fingers as he continued to watch me. My heart started to beat a little faster. The hum of the computers seemed to fade away, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. He stood up without a word and took a slow step toward me. Then another. He stopped right beside my chair, so close I could feel the heat radiating from him. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched him, my breath caught in my throat. "Can I try something?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a request for permission to do something to me. It felt like he was asking me to trust him. I could only manage a small, shaky nod. He knelt down slowly, so our eyes were on the same level. My hands were resting on my desk, my fingers still loosely curled over the mouse. He looked down at them, then back up at me. With infinite care, he reached out and took my hands in his. His palms were warm and slightly calloused, a stark contrast to my own. Then he took the silk tie. He didn't wrap it tightly. He didn't bind me. He gently, softly, looped the fabric around my wrists, which were still resting on the desk. The silk was cool and smooth against my skin. He held the ends of the tie in one hand, his other hand resting lightly on top of mine. It wasn't an act of possession or control. It was a connection, a fragile, symbolic tether made of a piece of his work attire, linking us together in the silent, sterile room. My mind went completely white with sensation. I could feel the texture of the silk, the warmth of his skin, the slight pressure of his touch. I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the way his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. The air was thick with everything we hadn't said for 2 weeks. It was charged, electric, and terrifyingly real. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, a few seconds, maybe a full minute, just looking at each other, breathing the same charged air. Then, as gently as he had done it, he unwrapped the tie. He let my hands go, and the sudden absence of his touch felt like a physical loss. He stood up, his face a mask of unreadable emotion. He dropped the tie onto the table as if it had burned him. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice rough. And before I could find my own, before I could ask what any of that meant, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the humming computers, the ghost of his touch on my skin, and a heart that was beating so hard I thought it might break right out of my chest. The next morning was pure torture. I barely slept, replaying the moment with the tie over and over in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the smooth silk on my wrists, see the intense look in Caleb's eyes. My brain, a machine built for analysis and order, was short-circuiting. I tried to apply logic to it, to find a rational explanation. Was he just overtired and acting weird? Was it some kind of bizarre, misplaced joke? A guy like him messing around? Straight guys do strange things sometimes when they're sleep-deprived, right? But my heart refused to accept those easy explanations. It knew what it felt like. It felt deliberate. It felt meaningful. The gentleness of his touch, the vulnerability in his question, "Can I try something?" None of it felt like a joke. It felt like a confession he didn't know how to speak. And that thought was both thrilling and petrifying. Because if I was right, everything had changed. But if I was wrong, I had just projected my own secret hopes onto a simple, weird moment, and I was setting myself up for a world of humiliation. When I got to the office, the main floor was buzzing with pre-presentation energy. I saw Caleb standing by the coffee machine, talking to one of the architects. He looked tired, but he was smiling his usual easy smile. For a second, I thought I might have imagined the entire thing. Maybe it was a stress-induced hallucination. But then he glanced up and our eyes met from across the room. The smile on his face vanished instantly. A flicker of something, panic, regret, crossed his features before he quickly looked away, turning his full attention back to the conversation with an intensity that was clearly forced. Okay, so I hadn't imagined it. It was real, and now it was a living, breathing thing of awkwardness between us. The space that had been our private bunker was gone, and we were back in the public sphere, navigating this new, unspoken tension. My anxiety, which had been quieted by our late-night camaraderie, came roaring back to life. I spent the morning at my desk, trying to look busy, my stomach churning with a toxic cocktail of hope and fear. Hope that it meant what I thought it meant. Fear that I had completely misread the situation and made him so uncomfortable that he could barely look at me. The presentation was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Mr. Henderson wanted us to do one final run-through in the archive room at noon, just the 2 of us. The thought of being back in that small, enclosed space with him filled me with a deep sense of dread. The room that had become a sanctuary he now felt like it would be a crucible. When I walked in, he was already there, standing over the table and shuffling through some papers, his back to me. He didn't turn around when I entered. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the comfortable quiet we had cultivated. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding weak. "Hey," he replied, still not looking at me. "Just wanted to check the final printouts." We stood on opposite sides of the room for a full minute, the unspoken event of the previous night hanging in the air between us like a thick fog. I replayed it again, dissecting every detail. The softness of the silk, the warmth of his hands, the question in his eyes. It was a moment of profound intimacy, disguised as something strange and ambiguous. How could he act like it never happened? Or worse, how could he regret it so much that he couldn't even face me? The fear began to eclipse the hope. I was an idiot. I had taken a moment of exhaustion-fueled strangeness and built a castle of dreams on it. I braced myself for him to say something dismissive, to make a joke about it, and shatter my foolish hopes completely. The presentation was a blur. I sat in the back of the conference room while Caleb took the stage. He was brilliant, of course. He commanded the room, weaving together the technical data, the budget, and my visuals into a compelling narrative. He was the confident, capable Caleb that everyone knew and admired. He never once looked at me. When it was over, the clients were ecstatic, and Mr. Henderson was beaming. People were shaking Caleb's hand, clapping him on the back. He was the hero of the hour. I slipped out before the celebration really got going, retreating to the relative safety of my desk. I just wanted to go home, to put this whole emotional roller coaster behind me and go back to my quiet, orderly, and lonely life. It was safer there. I was packing up my bag when I heard footsteps approaching my desk. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. The unique cadence of his walk was now permanently etched into my brain. Miles. I slowly lifted my head. Caleb was standing there, looking uncertain. His celebratory high seemed to have faded, replaced by that same guarded expression from the morning. The office was mostly empty now, people having left to celebrate at a nearby bar. "Congratulations," I said, my voice flat. "You were great." "We were great," he corrected me softly. "Your visuals were what sold it." Everyone was blown away. He paused, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Listen, can we talk? For real this time?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. He was either going to apologize and put me out of my misery, or something else. "Okay," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Not here," he said, glancing around the empty office. "Can we go back to the archive room? Just for a minute." My stomach twisted. The last place I wanted to be was back in that room, the scene of the crime, so to speak. But I nodded anyway. I had to know. I followed him down the quiet hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. He pushed the door open and held it for me. The room was just as we'd left it. Empty pizza boxes, scattered papers, his discarded blue tie still lying on the table like a piece of evidence. He closed the door behind us, and the soft click of the latch sealed us in. The silence was back, but this time it was different. It was expectant. Caleb didn't look at me at first. He walked over to the table and picked up the tie, holding it in his hands just like he had the night before. "I am so sorry, Miles," he started, his voice low and full of an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "I've been acting like a total idiot all day." I stayed silent, waiting. He finally turned to face me, his eyes filled with a raw, painful honesty. "Last night, the thing with the tie, I'm not even sure what I was thinking. It was stupid. It was weird. And I'm so sorry if it made you uncomfortable or freaked you out. That's the last thing I ever wanted to do." Here it was. The apology. The dismissal. My heart sank. But I had to be honest. "It didn't make me uncomfortable," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Just confused." A look of surprise, and maybe relief, crossed his face. "Confused. Yeah, I get that." He took a deep breath, like he was steeling himself. "The thing is, I'm not very good with words. Not like you are. You can make images and designs that say everything perfectly. I build things. I manage things. When it comes to this," he gestured vaguely between us, "I'm clumsy." He looked down at the tie in his hands. "I've wanted to talk to you, really talk to you, for months. Not about work. I'd see you at your desk, so focused and quiet, and I don't know. I was drawn to it. To you. But I had no idea what to say. I felt like a big, dumb jock trying to talk about art history. I figured you were way out of my league. Probably thought I was just some loud guy who talks too much about concrete." My breath hitched. This was not what I expected. "These last 2 weeks," he continued, his gaze finding mine again. "Being in here with you, talking to you, it's been the best part of my year. And last night, when we finished everything, I just felt this overwhelming need to connect with you, to do something that wasn't about work. And I panicked. I didn't know how to ask if I could hold your hand. I didn't know how to tell you that I think I'm falling for you. So I did that. With the tie. It was a stupid, desperate, Symbolic gesture from a guy who doesn't know how to say what he feels. He finally fell silent, his confession hanging in the air. He looked terrified, like he had just laid his entire soul bare and was waiting for me to stomp on it. And in that moment, all my own fear and anxiety vanished, replaced by a wave of warmth and clarity. He wasn't rejecting me. He was just as scared as I was. "Caleb," I said, and my voice was steady now. "I thought you were straight. I thought you were this confident, untouchable guy who had his life all figured out. I've been sitting at my desk for a year, thinking you were a work of art in a museum I wasn't allowed to get close to." A slow, disbelieving smile spread across his face, a look of pure, unadulterated relief. "You thought? Wow, Miles, I haven't really dated anyone, ever. I've been so focused on work. And honestly, I've never felt this way about anyone before. Man or woman, it's all new. You're new. And it's terrifying." I took a step toward him, closing the distance between us. "Me too," I admitted. He looked from my eyes down to my lips and back again. The air grew thick and warm. "Can I?" he started, his voice husky. "Try something again? Something a little more direct this time." I didn't need to nod. I just leaned in, and he met me halfway. The kiss wasn't tentative or questioning like the moment with the tie had been. It was confident, firm, and full of all the pent-up tension, all the unspoken longing, all the hope and fear of the last 2 weeks. It was a mutual answer to a question we had both been too scared to ask. It felt like coming home. In the weeks and months that followed, our lives began to merge in the most natural, wonderful way. The Henderson Tower project was a success for the firm and for us. The archive room was eventually cleared out, but it remained our place, a silent monument to the beginning of our story. Our first official date was awkward and perfect, a fancy dinner where we both felt a little out of place and ended up laughing about it over cheap ice cream afterward. Telling people at work was less of an event than we had feared. Most people, it turned out, were not nearly as oblivious as we had thought. Mr. Henderson just grunted and said, "Well, the results speak for themselves. Good work, you too," which we decided to take as his blessing. The quiet guy from the corner and the office's kinetic energy were now a team, and it just seemed to make sense to everyone. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, a life that was both ordered and beautifully unpredictable. We spent weekends exploring the city, having those deep conversations that used to be reserved for 2 in the morning, and enjoying the simple, domestic bliss of cooking together in my small apartment. The loneliness that had been my constant companion was gone, replaced by the steady, warm presence of Caleb. He was still loud and confident, but now I knew the quiet, thoughtful man underneath. And I learned that I wasn't just an observer. I could be a participant in my own life, in our life. One evening, a few months later, we were at my place, getting ready to go out. I was looking for a specific shirt when I saw Caleb standing by my dresser, a thoughtful smile on his face. In his hand, he was holding one of my ties, a simple, charcoal gray one. He looped it playfully over his hand, mimicking his own action from that fateful night. "You know," he said, his eyes sparkling with affection and humor, "I think I owe this whole industry an apology. I've found a much better use for these things." He tossed the tie onto the bed and pulled me into his arms, his kiss erasing any lingering memory of confusion or fear, leaving only warmth and certainty in its place. I used to think that life was a carefully designed blueprint, a series of lines and specifications that you had to follow precisely. I thought my world was meant to be quiet, orderly, and lived within the margins. But Caleb taught me that the best parts of life are the ones you can never plan for. They aren't found in the grand designs or the final presentations. They're built in the quiet, unexpected moments, in a dusty room after midnight, with nothing more than a shared silence and a silent, desperate hope. And sometimes, it takes the most awkward, clumsy gesture to tie your whole world together.